of crime. And he's absolutely right. Until you actually get into the weeds of the causes of crime, ultimately we're never going to break that offending cycle. The Honourable Member for Broadland said the danger of short-term sentences was you're in danger of turning small-scale offenders into greater offenders, and he cited the evidence for that in his very effective contribution. And the Honourable Member for Warrington South told us of his experience as a magistrate and of that need to break the cycle of reoffending, and asked for reassurance there'd be additional prison officers in his own local open prison when the numbers are expanded there, and he was quite right to do so. Mr Deputy Speaker, another day, another Department of Justice, or as I call it, the Department of Justice delayed bill in front of this House. And as it draws to a close, let's consider the gravity of the task at hand. This bill is supposed to be trying to rectify problems in our justice system, which is beleaguered by overcrowded prisons and overstretched probation service, and the dire consequences, quite frankly, of the last 13 years of mismanagement of the criminal justice system, during which we've observed the unfolding of what can only really be described as a penal catastrophe under the current government. For over a decade, they've promised a robust and rigorous approach to law and order. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, when it comes to justice, it's the evidence that matters. And the evidence is clear beyond reasonable doubt. We were assured of 20,000 new prison places by the mid-2020s. As of today, less than half are on track to meet the deadline, and the totality of this pledge will not see fruition before 2030. The prison estate's at 99% capacity because the government has failed time and again to act on warnings of overcrowding and capacity, and now they're using this rushed bill as a sticking plaster over a gaping wound. The job's certainly not done. The situation has reached a desperate state, and judges are now compelled to delay sentencing hearings for people on bail, thus leaving convicted criminals to roam our streets. It's not a proactive measure, it's a reactive one, a response to a crisis that's been foretold and ignored, and it seeks to introduce a presumption that sentences of 12 months or more will be suspended. And that is something, as my Right Honourable friend said, that we will be exploring in great detail in the committee stage of the bill. I won't detain the House much longer because I know that there is a statement to follow, but the government's narrative, Mr Deputy Speaker, is one of a pivot towards rehabilitation and community sentence. However, the reality is a narrative of necessity. The government's own impact assessment estimates an increased caseload of 1,700 to 6,800 cases due to more suspended sentences, and at least 850 due to the expansion of the home detention curfew. And yet, there's no corresponding increase in support for the probation service, which is already on its knees. How can we expect to have a system to rehabilitate when it in itself is in need of urgent repair? Mr Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I beg your pardon, the proposed changes to short sentences raise grave concerns. No offences have been ruled out of scope, regardless of the nature of the offence. This means that even known stalkers, sex offenders, and domestic abusers could be managed in the community, posing a risk to new and past victims alike. And my Right Honourable friend quite rightly pointed out that it could be new victims that are targeted by these offenders. That's not what justice looks like. My Right Honourable friend, the Shadow Justice Secretary, already mentioned cases of violent offenders who could avoid being locked up under this proposed legislation. I could add to this another example. John Gallagher strangled his partner, punched her in the head several times as she was screaming, thinking she was going to die. He said to her, "If I can't have you, no one can," before trapping her in a bathroom overnight. This man received a 9-month sentence. And under this proposal, violent offenders just like him could avoid prison thanks to this government. The government has also been quick to proclaim its commitment to protecting the public from serious offenders. They speak of extending whole life orders and ensuring that those convicted of the most serious crimes serve their full sentences. Now, these are measures that we can support, but beneath the veneer of the tough rhetoric, there is an inconvenient truth. The prisons that are required to house these offenders are not materialising. The government hasn't just moved the goalposts, they've taken them down entirely. In their place, we're being offered a vision of electronic monitoring, home detention curfews, a vision where serious offenders could be released up to 6 months early. The government assures us that violent offenders and those convicted of sexual offences will be excluded, yet fails to provide clarity on what constitutes suitable for release. The ambiguity surrounding this crucial definition is not just a matter of semantics, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is a matter of public safety. What does it say about our commitment to victims and to public safety that those who have inflicted great harm could be deemed suitable for early release? Now, we learn of the government's scheme to release offenders early on compassionate grounds, a policy which is shrouded in secrecy, lacking the scrutiny of this House. This clandestine approach to justice is unacceptable, and the British public deserves transparency, especially on matters that will directly impact their safety and their well-being. So let's not forget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government's botched privatisation and subsequent renationalisation of the probation service, which has done nothing but exacerbate the problems within our justice system. Probation is in such a dire state that since reunification in 2021 of the 31 inspections by the HM inspection of probation, only one has received a good rating. This is a damning indictment of the current government's ability to protect the public and rehabilitate offenders. The Labour Party is offering a different path, one of strategic foresight and one that ensures decisions about the running of prisons and probation services are driven by public safety and not by political expediency. We take a different view to the government. We believe in a justice system that's fair, robust and above all transparent. We recognise that to break the cycle of reoffending we must invest in our probation service and make it a beacon of rehabilitation, and we understand that to truly protect the public we must ensure that prisons are places where offenders can be securely housed and effectively reformed, a justice system that stands as a testament to our values and not as a monument to failure.
Gareth Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start my remarks. It's the first time that I've faced the Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Cardiff West, across the dispatch box, so I would like to start with a point of agreement with him. I agree with him that this has been a strong and thoughtful debate, and I'm grateful to all of those who have spoken in it. Now, as my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, said when he opened the debate, this bill builds on our record of cutting crime and will protect the public and cut crime even further. The most dangerous offenders will remain behind bars for longer, and we will take action to prevent those who have committed low-level offences from falling further into lives of crime. Mr. Speaker, honourable and right honourable members today have raised a wide range of points and questions. Unfortunately, in the time that I have, I will not be able to respond to all of them, but I am, of course, happy to engage with members individually later in writing.
There are a lot of members entering the chamber for reasons that are apparent, that have not taken part in or heard this debate. I hope the House will do the Minister the courtesy of hearing his wind-up.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I will respond to members that I don't mention individually, either in writing or in person, especially on points that I miss. Now, the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Birmingham Ladywood, opened for the opposition and started her remarks by saying that the government is doing nothing to address prison places. And it is true that prison population has risen under this government, and that is because more people are going to prison for longer under this government. But it is not true to say that the government is doing nothing about prison places. We've set about the largest prison building programme since the Victorian era. We have set about building 20,000 new prison places, backed by £4 billion of investment, and we have delivered 5,500 of those places already, with a further 2,000 coming online later this year. And by the end of 2025, we will have delivered over 10,000 places in total. We are building 6 new prisons. HMP Five Wells and HMP Foss Way opened in the last 2 years. HMP Millsike is under construction in York. 3 further prisons in Leicestershire, Buckinghamshire and Lancashire are currently going through the planning process. She then wants us to talk about attacking us over probation. And it is right, she is correct, that some prison capacity measures will increase the demand for probation. But we are committed to ensuring that probation has the resource it needs to meet demand. And this year, we have already increased prison funding for the probation service by an additional £155 million to recruit staff, bring down caseloads, and better deliver supervised supervision of offenders in the community. We continue, Mr Deputy Speaker, to focus on recruitment and retention, and have accelerated the recruitment of trainee probation officers to increase staffing levels, particularly in areas with the most significant staffing challenges. And as a result, we've increased staffing in the probation service by over 4,000 people since 2020. The final part of her speech was the Labour claim that they are in favour of tough sentences. But the fact of the matter is, Mr Deputy Speaker, that Labour have opposed every single measure this government has introduced since our term of office. It was Labour that introduced the halfway release point for serious offenders under Section 244 of the Criminal Justice Act 2003. And it was Labour who voted against us when we toughened sentences for serious offenders. They voted against our Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Act, preferring to keep dangerous criminals on our streets rather than behind bars. Now, that act, Mr Deputy Speaker, introduced whole life orders for child killers, life sentences for drivers who kill while intoxicated, ends the automatic release for dangerous and violent sexual offenders, and gives the Secretary of State the power to refer high-risk offenders to the Repol Board who would otherwise automatically be released. Labour voted against all of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, so we will take no lessons from there.
Very good. What about Seminars? Excellent.
Now, the Honourable Gentleman for Cardiff West ran through the list of speakers. I won't do the same, but I will pick out a few. My honourable friend and neighbour, the chairman of the Justice Committee, the member for Bromley and Chislehurst, gave what I thought was a characteristically knowledgeable and thoughtful and balanced speech. He was substantially supported by my right honourable friend for Northampton North, and my honourable friend, the member for Aylesbury. And he set out, he talked about smarter sentencing, Mr Deputy Speaker, and set out what the statutory purpose of prison was, and suggested that we should do that, and we will look at that. He also made what I thought was a very sensible point, that short sentences disrupt community ties, relationships, jobs, and home, and the loss of these can lead to people to reoffend more greatly. Now, on the subject of short sentences, Mr Deputy Speaker, I must make it clear that we are not abolishing sentences of immediate custody. There is no proposed ban. The courts will retain wide discretion to impose immediate custody in many circumstances, as my honourable friend, the member for Bury North, correctly observed. And where a sentence is suspended, the courts have a range of robust powers to ensure offenders are effectively managed when a sentence is suspended, including electronic monitoring to ensure curfews of up to 20 hours per day are observed, and can be put in place exclusion zones so that they stay out of areas where they are most likely to get into trouble. There are also various high-tech solutions like alcohol tags that are so sophisticated they can take a reading of offenders' sweat every 30 minutes to make sure they are confronting the issues with alcohol that have landed them in trouble in the first place. Now, it is also true that over 50% of those who are sentenced to less than 12 months will go on to commit another offence within 1 year of their release, Mr Deputy Speaker. When we look at offenders who are given suspended sentences in the community with conditions, the reoffending rate is much lower, at around 24%. The Ministry of Justice's own robust evidence suggests that similar offenders given community sentences or suspended sentence orders are 4 percentage points less likely to reoffend than those sentenced to short custodial sentences. Now, that might not sound like a great deal, but it could mean up to 21,000 fewer offences are committed, meaning that fewer of our constituents are becoming victims of crime. My honourable friend, the member for Harborough, mentioned the case of remand, and he raised the case of a significant rise in demand cases and contributing facts to prison demand, and he's correct to do so. Much of the reason for remand coming up is there are various reasons, but the courtroom backlog driven by the pandemic and the bar strike that followed it are substantial reasons for it, and we're doing everything in our power to bring this down. But he will understand that the judiciary are fully independent. It's not within our gift to dictate which cases they take to court. But nothing in this bill diminishes our efforts to reduce the backlog and reduce demand pressure. And I'll be happy to meet my honourable friend to discuss this further. Protecting the public from crime is our top priority. The most effective way to do this is to reduce the amount of crime being committed, and that is why we are introducing the presumption to suspend short sentences. The government is taking resolute, evidence-based action to ensure that low-level offenders break the cycle of offending, because reoffending devastates communities and creates more victims. Now, on the subject of whole-life orders, Mr Deputy Speaker, this was welcomed across the Chamber. These measures will ensure that the very worst murderers will spend the rest of their lives in prison. There will be no possibility of release by the parole board for these offenders. By making these changes, we are sending a very clear message that for the most heinous, horrific cases, a whole-life order will be the correct sentence, and the only thing that will prevent that is if the court believes that there are exceptional circumstances, and they would have to be exceptional circumstances, that would make such a sentence unjustified. We're also making it clear that murders of a single victim, which involves sadistic or sexual conduct, would also be punishable by imposing a whole-life order, again, unless there are exceptional circumstances. Such offending is so serious, causes so much anguish of victims' families and wider communities, as we have seen following the brutal killings of Zara Alina, Sabina Nessa and others, that it is only right that such perpetrators should be locked up for the rest of their lives. Mr Deputy Speaker, a number of members referenced sexual offences, including my right honourable friend for Whittam. Now, I'm going to focus on rape, Mr Deputy Speaker, because rape is a uniquely serious crime, one that causes terrible trauma for its victims. It's therefore right that those found guilty of rape and other equally serious sexual offences should be subject to a punishment that reflects the severity of their offending. That is why those measures will ensure that rapists will serve the whole of their custodial sentence behind bars. They will no longer be subject to any automatic or discretionary early release, but will have to spend every single day of their custodial term locked up as directed by the court. And this will be followed by a robust period on licence where such offenders will be supervised by probation and subject to possible recall to custody if their risk cannot be safely managed in the community. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is clear from the debate that there are strong views on this bill, but it is the first stage of a legislative process, and we welcome engagement from members across the House as we seek to strike the right balance in sentencing. I can see personally the merit in ideas such as reviewing some measures and maybe even a power to switch them off, and it is right that we consider the use of these measures carefully. Further, on knife crime, I hear the points raised by several members this evening and will look closely at this issue. Our aim is to make sure that we can keep the most dangerous offenders in prison for as long as necessary to keep the public safe from harm, while ensuring that sentences do not trap the redeemable in a revolving door of offending. And I therefore commend this bill to the House.
Question. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Statement, the Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. With permission, I'd like to make a statement about the government's plan to stop the boats and tackle the vile trade in people smuggled across the Channel. 3 weeks ago, the Supreme Court handed down their judgment on this government's migration and economic development agreement with Rwanda. In that judgment, their lordships upheld the High Court and the Court of Appeal that it is lawful to relocate illegal migrants who have no right to be here to another safe country for asylum processing and resettlement. But the court upheld the judgment of the Court of Appeal, meaning that the government cannot yet lawfully remove people to Rwanda. This was due to the court's concerns that relocated individuals might be refoulement, i.e. removed to a country where they could face persecution or ill treatment. We did not agree with that assessment, but of course we respect the judgment of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also acknowledged that their concerns were not immutable, were not an aspersion on Rwanda's intentions, and that changes may be delivered in the future which could address their concerns. Today, I can inform the House that those concerns have been conclusively answered and those changes made. As a result of intensive diplomacy by the Prime Minister, by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, by the Attorney General's Office, and of course by the Home Office, we have created a situation which addresses the concerns. Our rule of law partnership with Rwanda sets out in a legally binding international treaty the obligations both on the United Kingdom and Rwanda within international law, and sets out to this House and to the courts why Rwanda is and will remain a safe country for the purposes of asylum and resettlement. This is a partnership to which we and Rwanda are both completely committed. Rwanda is a safe and prosperous country. It is a vital partner for the UK, and our treaty puts beyond legal doubt the safety of Rwanda and ends the endless merry-go-round of legal challenges that have frustrated thus far this policy and second-guess the will of Parliament. I want to put on record my gratitude to President Kagame, Foreign Minister Baruta, and the Rwandan government for working with us at pace to do what it takes to get this deal up and running, with flights taking off as soon as possible. Rwanda will introduce strengthened end-to-end asylum system, which will include a new specialist asylum appeals tribunal to consider individual appeals against any refused claim. It will have one Rwandan and one other Commonwealth co-president and be made up of judges from a mix of nations selected by those co-presidents. We have been working with Rwanda to build capacity and to make clear to those relocated to Rwanda that they will not be sent to another third country. The treaty is binding in international law. It also enhances the role of the Independent Monitoring Committee, which will ensure adherence to obligations under the treaty and have the power to set its own priority areas for monitoring. It will be given unfettered access to complete assessments and reports and monitor the entire relocation process, including initial screening to relocation and settlement in Rwanda. And it will develop a system to enable relocated individuals and legal representatives to lodge confidential complaints directly with the committee. But given the Supreme Court's judgment, we cannot be confident that courts will respect the new treaty on its own. So today, the government has published emergency legislation to make unambiguously clear that Rwanda is a safe country and to prevent the courts from second-guessing Parliament's will. We will introduce legislation tomorrow in the form of the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill, to give effect to the judgment of Parliament that Rwanda is a safe country, notwithstanding UK law or any interpretation of international law. For the purpose of the bill, a safe country is defined as one to which people may be removed from the UK in compliance with all of the United Kingdom's obligations under international law that are relevant to the treatment in that country of people who are removed there. It means that someone removed to that country will not be removed or sent to another country in contravention of any international law, and anyone who is seeking asylum or who has had asylum determination will have their claim determined and be treated in accordance with that country's obligations under international law. Anyone removed to Rwanda under the provisions of the treaty will not be removed from Rwanda except to the United Kingdom in a very small number of limited and extreme circumstances. The UK, and should the UK request the return of any relocated person, Rwanda will make them available. Decision makers, which both the Home Secretary and immigration officers and the courts must all treat Rwanda as a safe country. And they must do so notwithstanding all relevant UK law or any interpretation of international law, including the Human Rights Convention, the Refugee Convention, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights 1966, the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane or Degrading Treatment or Punishment 1984, the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings done at Warsaw on the 16th of May 2005, customary international law and any other international law or convention or rule of international law whatsoever, including any order, judgment, decision or measure of the European Court of Human Rights. Where the European Court of Human Rights indicates an interim measure relating to the intended removal of someone to Rwanda under or purportedly under a provision of Immigration Acts, a Minister of the Crown alone, and not a court or tribunal, will decide whether the United Kingdom will comply with those interim measures. And to further prevent individual claims to prevent removal, the bill disapplies the relevant provisions in the Human Rights Act 1998, including sections 2, 3, 6, 7, 8 and 9. It is a bill which is lawful, it is fair, and it is necessary. Because people will only stop coming here illegally when they know that they cannot stay here and that they will be detained and quickly removed to a safe third country. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is only by breaking the cycle and delivering a deterrent that we will remove the incentive for people to be smuggled here and stop the boats. This legislation builds on the Illegal Migration Act that this House passed this summer and complements the basket of other measures that the UK government is employing to end illegal migration. The largest ever small boats deal with France, for example, tackling the supply of boats and parts, the arrest and conviction of people smugglers, and illegal working raids have all helped to drive down small boat arrivals, drive them down by more than a third this year, as the numbers are indeed rising elsewhere in Europe. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Parliament and the public alike support the Rwanda plan. Other countries have since copied our plans with Rwanda, and we know from interviews that the prospect of being relocated out of the UK has already had a deterrent effect. This will be considerably magnified when we get those flights to Rwanda. This treaty and this new bill will help to make that a reality, and I commend this statement to the House.
Order. And the usual rules apply that only those who have been here for the statement should stand to ask a question of the statement. Shadow Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of the statement. Well, this is total chaos in the government and in the Conservative Party. This is the desperate, dying days of a party ripping itself apart, clearly totally out of ideas, lost any sense of leadership or direction. We've got the Home Secretary making the statement, but the rumours that the Immigration Minister has resigned. Well, where is he? Perhaps that he can make that the first question that he answers, whether he still has an Immigration Minister in place. They've got open warfare among their backbenches, the starting gun fired on the next leadership election, and once again, the whole country paying the price for this chaos. The third Home Secretary to go to Rwanda with a chequebook and to come back waving a piece of paper, making grand promises. The third piece of new Tory legislation on channel crossings in 2 years. Each time they've told us the new laws would stop all the boat crossings and send everyone who arrived to another country, but the first law they had to partially revoke because it was making things worse. The second one they haven't implemented because they know it won't work, and now they're on their third new law. Forgive us for not believing that this one's going to solve anything either. But the previous Home Secretary seems to agree with us, because she's already saying tonight the bill is fatally flawed. It won't stop the boats.
There you have it.
One side of the party warning it doesn't come close to meeting Suella's test, the other side appalled that the Home Secretary, who used to wander around the world promoting international law, has just boasted in his statement about a new British bill that tells the courts not just to ignore international law, but to also ignore the facts. What kind of party have they become? And the view from number 10? The Prime Minister has just met with his backbenchers. And the official briefing from that meeting says he's told MPs that they've gone as far as possible, but Rwanda didn't want to be part of anything that broke or disapplied international law. The statement from the Rwandan government: without lawful behaviour from the UK, Rwanda would not be able to continue with the Migration and Economic Development Partnership. You could not make this up. So our Supreme Court says the Rwanda scheme's a problem because of evidence that Rwanda isn't complying with international treaties on the treatment of asylum seekers, but the only thing stopping the British government ignoring international law completely is the Rwandan government. The Rwandan government keeping us on the straight and narrow, and a Prime Minister too scared to actually defend a policy in its own terms, too scared to tell them what he really thinks, too scared to take a view, instead hiding behind President Kagame. Weak, weak, weak. He doesn't deserve to be running the country if he cannot even sort out the issues and the divisions on this, on his flagship policy in his own party. And all for what? For a scheme that will likely cover less than 1% of the people who arrive in this country to claim asylum and will cost hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. So I asked the Home Secretary to tell us about the cost. In 2022, the UK taxpayer paid the Rwanda £140 million, but the Permanent Secretary has said there are additional payments each year. So can he tell us, on top of that £140 million, how much more has already been sent as an additional payment this year? And is there a secret commitment to make annual payments under the Migration Economic Development Plan, even if no asylum seekers are sent to Rwanda? Can he confirm the British taxpayer is also going to have to pay additional millions to sort out the problems in the Rwandan asylum system, even though the government's totally failing to sort out the problems and delays in the British asylum system, which the Conservatives broke? Can he also confirm the UK is paying costs for people sent to Rwanda for 5 years? Can he tell us how much that is going to be? And can he confirm it's going to be at least twice as much as dealing with those cases here? And can he tell us to how much is the total sum that he is going to be paying to Rwanda, instead of trying to hide this information? And can he tell us how many people are going to be covered. Because the treaty says it's limited by capacity in Rwanda, the Court of Appeal said it would be 100 people, and that talk of thousands of people was political hyperbole. So will he now admit, even if he ever gets this failing scheme off the ground, it will cover less than 1% of the people who applied for asylum last year? And tell us how many Rwandan refugees the UK is going to take and who is going to pay for them. He has a treaty and a law he knows will not stop dangerous boat crossings. We should be taking action to stop those boat crossings, to go after the criminal gangs, to clear the asylum backlog. And he knows that Labour's plan to set up the new cross-border unit would have far more effect than the things that he has been talking about today. He says Rwanda isn't the be-all and end-all. They all think it's do or die, and that's why he's in so much chaos. He thinks, and he said it privately, that this whole thing is batshit. Well, that is nothing on what he's had to swallow to come forward and to tell us this statement today. This is total chaos. They're arguing about full-fat, semi-skimmed, skimmed options, a full-on milk wars in the Tory party that sums this failing government up. They can't solve their own Tory boats crisis. They can't defend our border security. They can't solve their broken asylum system. And they can't hold their party together. They do not deserve to run the country. Britain deserves better than this.
I think the calls for more from her own backbenches are well placed. I was hoping she'd speak longer so she would eventually get round to some comments on the bill or the policy, or some clue what on earth Labour would do. She asks about, and it's interesting, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is quite interesting. It is quite interesting that once again we see the mask slip on the other side of the House, because Mr. Deputy Speaker, she is critical. She is critical in her line of questioning about the financial arrangement which goes hand in hand with the agreement that we have come to with Rwanda. And it is interesting, this is the same party that were very critical of this government when we were forced by circumstances to reduce our overseas our official development assistance expenditure. So I just want to understand their thinking, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They seem comfortable with the idea the UK give away money to a country like Rwanda to help them develop, but they seem deeply uncomfortable when those countries actually earn the money by bringing forward reform. And it is, I think, a rather distasteful state of affairs that they would like to view Rwanda exclusively through the prism of development and aid, but are deeply uncomfortable when a country like Rwanda earns the money. And I think that is a rather distasteful state of affairs. The simple truth is, Rwanda is making huge progress in professionalising and strengthening its institutions, working alongside the UK and other international partners. And I believe that we are duty-bound to support countries like Rwanda when they play their part in addressing the issues that the world is facing. They are helping resolve problems rather than being part of a problem, and I think they deserve our thanks for doing so. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we will pursue this legislation which supports a treaty that sees Rwanda strengthening its institutions, addressing some of the world's most intractable challenges, and we support them as they are supporting us.
Order. If people could focus, please, on asking a question and not making statements. And secondly, please can we hear the questions and the answers in silence? There's a lot of calling on both sides. Dame Priti Patel.
Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement, and clearly he's now becoming incredibly familiar with the legal challenges that the government and the country and the nation faces when it comes to migration issues. So can my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, give details of the assessments that have been made as to whether the disapplication of the Human Rights Act and other laws are robust and will stand up to the legal challenges and ensure, ultimately, the delivery and the implementation of this policy to curb illegal migration?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the UK takes its international obligations incredibly seriously. The Human Rights Act is in part being disapplied through this legislation. We were, of course, one of the founding members of the European Court of Human Rights. We regard it as an important institution, but like many post-war institutions, it would benefit from evolution. It would benefit from updating. I've made that position clear when I was in my former role as Foreign Secretary. But the point is that we want to make sure that a country, Rwanda, which is working with us, strengthening its institutions and seeking to do the right thing by refugees, both European refugees and African refugees, is supported in doing so. We have a robust legal system. We have a robust parliamentary system here in the UK. We should have some more self-confidence in those systems and use our experience to help capacity building in partner countries like Rwanda.
And Diana Johnson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, when the Permanent Secretary came before the committee last week, he was unable to tell us about how much is being spent on the Rwanda deal because ministers have decided to update Parliament annually. So can the Home Secretary now confirm today how much additional money will be provided to Rwanda in light of the changes in the treaty, and whether he will update Parliament more often than once a year? And we're looking forward to seeing the Immigration Minister at the Home Affairs Select Committee next Wednesday to ask him further questions. If for whatever reason he's not able to attend, would the Home Secretary attend in his place?
Mr Deputy Speaker, make it absolutely clear, our commitment to publishing the cost of this on an annual basis, we remain committed to that promise. And just to make it absolutely clear to the House, the Rwandans asked for no additional money in connection with this treaty. None was asked for, none was offered, none was provided. We will update the House in the way that we have committed to, and I have no doubt the Immigration Minister will be in front of her committee as promised.
Natalie Elphicke.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister said that he would not allow a foreign court to block his Rwanda plans, meaning, of course, the European Court of Human Rights. So can my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, explain why Article 11(4)(a) of the treaty expressly requires Rwanda to enable migrants to make claims to that European court?
Mr Deputy Speaker, we've made it throughout this plan, we have made it clear that we will remain in conformity with international law. The European Court on Human Rights, of course, does have an important role to play. But the point that we have made is that there are many countries that are in disagreement with international courts, including the Court of the European Court of Human Rights. We are determined to do the right thing to deter these evil people smugglers, the slave traders, those people who would seek to abuse and take advantage of vulnerable people, and work with Rwanda in conformity with international law, but being clear that we are not going to be deterred from acting promptly.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Humpty Dumpty said, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. Just by saying that Rwanda is a safe country does not make it so. Legislating does not make it so. The Minister says that Rwanda is safe, but yet somehow his treaty says that we will accept asylum seekers from Rwanda, from that safe country, so it's both safe and unsafe. He says he respects the assessment of the Supreme Court, but he's here today to override it. His treaty says that they won't remove children, but the treaty is full of provisions for what happens when children do end up in Rwanda. He says that human rights are important, but they're not there for everybody, and he seeks to disapply them. He comes here today as well, while the Rwandan minister says it's always been important to both Rwanda and the UK that our rule of law partnership meets the highest standards of international law, and it places obligations on both the UK and Rwanda to act lawfully. Without lawful behaviour by the UK, Rwanda would not be able to continue with the migration and economic development partnership. So if this deal does break international law and our treaty obligations, the deal fails to exist. Well, he says it doesn't, but it's not a matter that you can just overlook Human Rights Convention, the Refugee Convention, all of those other conventions, and disapply them when it suits. International law doesn't work that way. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is an assault on human rights. We should not let this stand from this House, because human rights are universal and they are for everybody, not who the Home Secretary thinks that they should apply to. This bill is a dangerous distraction. It is part of a march towards fascism. Every single piece. I do not say that lightly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do not say these things lightly. Does he believe that human rights are universal, or does he not? That is the key question to this legislation. Because every piece of legislation that we have passed so far, we were told that it would be a deterrent, and yet here today, none of them have worked. And this illiberal, toxic piece of legislation today is supposed to be a deterrent when all of the others have failed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, his plans for Rwanda have been found to be unlawful. They are immoral, they are a waste of money, they should be scrapped. Scotland wants none of this appalling legislation.
Secretary.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it would shame that the honourable lady's comments are clearly based on what I can only assume is a cursory and superficial skim of the legislation, because she criticised it for a number of things that are not in the legislation. So I'll forgive her that she didn't take the time to read it properly. We are absolutely committed to human rights. We were one of the founders of the European Court of Human Rights, and our commitment to abide by international law is unwavering. It underpins the relationship that we have with Rwanda, and I can assure her that that will remain in the forefront of our thinking throughout. And she might reflect on the appropriateness of throwing the word fascism around when we are bringing a bill upon which every member of this House will be allowed to vote, because we are in a democracy.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The new Home Secretary will, of course, be aware and welcome the fact that he will be gauged, indeed judged, by the effectiveness of this legislation for weeks and months and years, and perhaps decades even. So will he confirm that the provisions in this bill are sufficient to resist individual challenges from those who might be sent to Rwanda and the interest groups and the deluded, dodgy lawyers who support them? And in particular, will he speak specifically about the disapplication of Rule 39?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is, the right is for ministers to decide on our response to a Rule 39 application. That is in the bill. He is right that this sets important precedents. The precedent we want to establish is that the people who wish to live and work in this country should do so through the numerous safe and legal routes that we have established. That those people who put themselves in the hands of evil, vile, criminal gangs and people smugglers should not expect to be here, but that we work with safe third countries like Rwanda to ensure that those people who are removed here do still have their human rights respected and are homed in a country which respects their human rights. That underpins this bill, that underpins the treaty that this bill supports, and that runs through the heart of all the actions and decisions that we'll make in relation to illegal migration, our response to it.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the United States State Department annual report on country report on Rwanda says that amongst human rights issues are unlawful killing, arbitrary killing, cruel and inhuman or degrading treatment and torture by the Rwandan government. By what token does the Home Secretary, the judge that Rwanda is a safe country? Should he not actually hang his head in shame?
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Supreme Court, when they handed down their decision, focused on two elements of the relationship, the two elements of the situation in Rwanda. One was about the capacity of their judicial system, particularly when it comes to decisions around refugees. We have worked with Rwanda to improve that situation, and the treaty underpins the fantastic work that they have done with us and others to strengthen their institutions. And also, it spoke about the fear of refoulement, and the treaty ensures that that will not happen. I was also struck that in their judgment, they made heavy reference to the UNHCR. The UNHCR was critical of Rwanda, and yet, on the day after the judgment was put down by their lordships, the UNHCR flew 160 plus refugees to Rwanda. So I judge them by their actions, not just necessarily by their words. Rwanda has made huge progress with our help and the help of others, and they are now in a situation where they're able to sign a treaty which protects the refugees that are sent there, and I'm very, very confident that that will be the case.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Deputy Speaker, it's long overdue that we got to grips with the current levels of both legal and illegal immigration in this country, which is what our voters expect us to do. And can I congratulate my right honourable friend for bringing proposals to us, unlike the intellectual vacuum of the Labour Party. But can we be clear that when it comes to the boats crisis, the fault does not lie with those who try to seek a better life for themselves and their families, but with those who trade in human beings? And does my right honourable friend agree that there is a moral imperative to break the business model of the people smugglers, no less than there was a moral imperative to break the evil of slavery at the time? And should not all of us who believe in human rights dedicate ourselves to that end?
Mr Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. We don't do this because it is easy. We don't do this because it is convenient. We are doing this because it is incredibly important. If collectively the UK and other European countries do not address the issue of people smuggling, the winners will be the people smugglers. The losers will be the people who are manipulated by the people smugglers, the ones who are robbed, who are beaten, who are raped, who are murdered, who drown in the Mediterranean, who drown in the Channel. These are the people we are trying to help by bringing in a structure that breaks the business model of the people smugglers. And the vacuum that he talks about on the other benches, the silence when it comes to ideas is deafening. And they choose to oppose at every stage, and they do nothing to help address the evil of our time.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm sure you'll be updating us on when the next personal statement might be made to this House. Can I ask the Home Secretary, as those in Kigali appear to understand and agree with Winston Churchill, the point about international treaties and the European Court of Human Rights was to tackle oppressive governments and the things they did to citizens. Now, the reason why we sign up to international treaties is not just on immigration law. So changing anything in our relationship with the European Court of Human Rights will have an impact potentially on the trade and cooperation agreement, because that also states explicitly if we end judicial cooperation there would be a problem, and also the Good Friday Agreement, which also has the ECHR at the heart of it. So can you tell us what conversations he's had with the European Union and with the Irish about this legislation?
This legislation does not change our relationship with the ECHR.
Charles Barra.
Mr. Speaker, there are some in this House who take the view that the proposals we are putting forward is not the way to treat asylum seekers. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the people we are talking about are arriving in this country from a safe country, France, and they are mostly young men in their 20s and 30s who are coming here as economic migrants and not as asylum seekers, and it's important that that point is recognised.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this country has always been incredibly generous and remains incredibly generous to people who are seeking fleeing persecution, seeking safe haven, and we will continue to do that. But it is also right that many people who attempt to come to this country do so to try and get a better economic life for themselves. As my right honourable friend has said, we don't criticise people who seek to come to this country for economic reasons, but we also make it clear that there are safe and legal routes for them to do so. This is about breaking the business model of evil people smugglers who prey on the people that he speaks of, and we are duty-bound to explore every way of breaking that evil model, to break that evil trade in human misery, and to ensure that we protect the people that need protecting by working with countries like Rwanda who are seeking to do the right thing on the world stage.
Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Government briefings suggest that the government wanted to go further with this bill, but Rwanda government stopped them. How does the Home Secretary feel about being constrained legally by President Kagame?
That speculation is not accurate. Within the whole of this negotiation, we have always made it clear that we would work within the boundaries of international law. Rwanda take international law just as seriously as we do, which is why we and they are both completely comfortable that these proposals are within the bounds of international law.
Graham.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, over the last few years, we've taken over 500,000 refugees from different parts of the world, women, children and others, from countries in extreme difficulties. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if we can stop those who are being trafficked across the channel in small boats, we may well be able to help more of those in genuine, most danger?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is so important. It is so important that we break the trade in human misery that is being perpetrated by these people smugglers. This is a generous country. We do not want to see those people smugglers abuse our generosity, to erode that generosity. That's why getting this right is so important. That's why working with Rwanda is so important. That's why I'm very, very proud of how hard the Rwandans have worked to ensure that their institutions are robust and fair and impartial.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to know how much this shambles has cost the British taxpayer so far and is going to continue to cost us. This treaty means we will be obliged to support someone in Rwanda for up to 5 years. So what estimate has he made under the terms of this treaty of how much it will cost to support just one person for that full 5 years?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I find it rather strange. I find it rather strange. And the House will know I've already answered the fact that this will be reported in accordance with the commitments that have already been made. But I do think it's interesting how uncomfortable the opposition benches are with us having a partnership with an African country rather than an aid relationship with an African country. And I think, as I say, I think the mask has slipped with how the party opposite seeks to view countries like Rwanda, who are advancing, who are developing, and who seek to be treated as partners rather than just recipients of aid.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the UK-Rwanda partnership is actually a very long-standing one. I first went to the country 15 years ago. I've returned many times since, including when I was serving as Africa Minister. And I can just ask the Home Secretary, in terms of those who are railing against this deal on the opposition benches, and indeed of the judges who have criticised this deal, how many of them have been to the now Commonwealth country of Rwanda?
She asks an incredibly important question because I've recently returned from Rwanda. I have had extensive dealings with the Rwandan government, a Commonwealth partner, as she said, a country whose political leadership in many, indeed I would argue perhaps most cases, have themselves been refugees. They have huge pride in their country. They have a plan to see their country genuinely step up and be a serious player on the world stage. This partnership with the UK is part of Rwanda's plan for a development and advancement. I think we should support countries like Rwanda that are seeking to solve the world's problems rather than being part of the world's problems.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm afraid I've heard nothing from the Home Secretary today which persuades me that this policy towards Rwanda is anything other than immoral, inexpensive and unworkable. His predecessor earlier today told the House that she believed that if this policy did not work, the Conservative Party would face electoral oblivion. I actually wonder whether the Home Secretary accepts that that could be the situation that they're facing, because this is unworkable.
Oh, so you're the ones with the camera. Well, obviously, my plan is to make this work.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is to be congratulated for his commendable efforts to address a problem that is a major source of concern to all our constituents by concluding the treaty with Rwanda and by publishing this bill today. The bill, of course, as he will anticipate, will be closely scrutinised by colleagues, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions. But could he assist me with one point? Clause 41B specifically allows a court to consider an appeal on the grounds that Rwanda is not a safe country for the purpose in question, based upon that individual's particular circumstances. Can my right honourable friend say why this clause was inserted in the bill, and can he assure the House that it does not in any sense frustrate the bill's intent?
I can give my right honourable friend the reassurance that we do not envisage that this will frustrate the bill's intent. It is important that claimants do have recourse, if only for factual errors. And we are absolutely confident that the numerous measures that Rwanda has taken means that it is in fact a safe country for the purposes of asylum, because of the capacity building that we and others have done with their judicial system, because of their treaty commitment for non-refoulement, and therefore we are absolutely confident this will go forward. But of course it is right that there has to be mechanisms for individual cases.
I've heard.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can the Home Secretary confirm that he went to Rwanda intended to get a treaty that went much further than he's actually been allowed to go, and that what stopped him was the Rwandan government that refused to be part of a treaty that didn't recognise international law and conventions? So what does that say about taking back control when Rwanda is actually dictating his immigration policy?
Mr Deputy Speaker, his question starts with an error and gets worse from that point onwards. The simple fact of the matter is that we have been working with the Rwandans. They don't dictate to us. We don't dictate to them. We negotiate in good faith, as mature democracies tend to do.
Caroline Johnson.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for his efforts to try and tackle a
problem which is of great concern to my constituency Sleaford and North Hykeham, and I welcome the assertion of parliamentary sovereignty, because many of my constituents have questioned how the courts can tell us what to do. However, there is a provision, as he says, for individual claims. Can you tell me in what circumstances such an individual claim could expect to be successful, and how long that and the appeal process would be expected to take?
So the provision for individual claims has nothing to do with the safety of Rwanda, and that's the important distinction that needs to be made. Of course, there does need to be provisions for appeals. That is a normal part of any judicial or legal process. But the point is that this bill makes a huge step forward in our ability to work with Rwanda on refugee assessment, administration and ultimate relocation.
Howell Williams.
Deputy Speaker, the ECHR is fundamental to the operation of our Senedd in Wales as it is. Has he taken full account of the danger that his proposals might deal a fatal blow to devolution as it is at present?
We have no intention of leaving the ECHR, so his concerns are unwarranted.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, sir. The Home Secretary has delivered his deal today with his typical efficiency and transparency, and that should be welcome. But the one key aspect of immigration policy is the fast processing of claims in this country. Can he outline the progress that the government has made in this regard, and can he tell me and the House how this goes hand in hand with the Rwanda policy going forward?
He is absolutely right that this is part of a plan that has a number of elements. The speedy processing of asylum claims here in the UK is an important part of that. We've had a tenfold increase in the pace of asylum decisions. That is really important. It means that it relieves pressure on asylum accommodation, something which I know something about as the MP for Wethersfield. And we are absolutely determined that this plan, working in conjunction with the other elements of our migration plan, will stop the boats, get control of our borders and ensure that people know that those people who come here to the UK have done so through safe and legal routes, are adding to our society, are contributing to our economy, and that they know they will be welcomed when they arrive.
Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has twice refused to answer the question of whether the Immigration Minister has resigned, but he has, hasn't he? And can you just tell us, has he resigned because he thinks that this policy doesn't stand an earthly chance of working, or has he resigned because he's embarrassed that a British government would actually put ministers above the law? In other words, has he resigned because he thinks this policy is crazy, or because he doesn't think it's crazy enough?
Oh, the right honourable gentleman, right honourable, the honourable gentleman. The honourable gentleman always has an amusing turn of phrase, but his question is not one for me. If he wants to know what any particular member of this House is thinking, he should ask that member of the House.
Tim Lawton.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I echo the Home Secretary's praise of the patience shown by Rwanda, whose integrity has been severely impugned by those opposing this treaty. The Strasbourg Court recently said it is going to reform the Article 39 indications, acknowledging the weaknesses with them. There will now not be anonymous judges giving rulings. They will only be used in extremis, and the government will be allowed to put its case to weigh up the evidence. And Article 39 indications do not form part of the original ECHR Convention in any case. So how confident is he that challenges to Rwanda deportations will not now fall foul of Article 39 interim orders under the new terms of this new treaty?
He makes an incredibly important point, and it does prove actually that when the UK makes our case in international institutions like the ECHR and others, that we are listened to, that our views are respected and changes are made. And that is why the reform of these institutions is important, and it is done so often because of the points that the UK puts forward. But he's absolutely right. This legislation which supports the treaty, and the treaty is the really important element of this, will mean that we are now much better able to send people who should not be in the UK to Rwanda for their asylum applications and to start a new life in a country which is increasingly now well prepared to humanely and very effectively home them.
Imran Hussain.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the reality is the government is making a mockery of international law and playing with people's lives.
Exactly.
The Home Secretary referenced his plans to tackle illegal migration, but his plans for legal migration are just as draconian. Doubling the minimum income requirement for family visas to £38,700, knowing full well that hundreds of thousands of families will be torn apart, is nothing less than calculated, vindictive and punitive. Is the Home Secretary really prepared to tear up international law and tear apart families just so he can throw some red meat to his hard-right Tory backbenchers?
Well said.
We are not breaking international law.
Mr Speaker, clearly the most important thing about this whole proposal is to deter desperate people from leaving a safe country and taking the most risky journey it's possible to take across the busiest sea lane in the world. Now, can the Home Secretary update us on the position that will be and the message that needs to go over to the people smugglers and those desperate people that if you take this desperate journey, you will be removed and you'll removed to Rwanda, to a safe country for processing. And the key point is, from now on, not in many months' time.
My intention, the intention of the government is to ensure that this is operationalised as quickly as possible. My honourable friend makes an incredibly important point. Those people who have been smuggled across Europe by these people smugglers find themselves on the coast of France, a safe, prosperous and welcoming country, and they are encouraged by those evil people smugglers to get on increasingly fragile and unseaworthy vessels to try and cross the busiest shipping lane in the world at huge personal risk in order to come to the UK. And the message that they have to hear is, do not make that dangerous journey because you will not be able to stay in the UK. If you want to come and live and work here, do so by the safe and legal routes that are available to you.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has continuously said this bill complies with international law. So how does he square that with the statement on the very front of the bill in which it says that the Home Secretary is unable to make a statement that, in his view, the provisions of this bill are compatible with convention rights?
Because what the statement says on the front of the bill is clear, the words are unambiguous, but also I am absolutely certain that we are in accordance with international law. The two are not interchangeable.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As I know all too well, it's easy to throw rocks and criticise from the sidelines on immigration. It's a lot harder to actually get on and deliver something. Now, looking at what's been published today, obviously Brit starts bringing up questions around the law and also around the actual way it would be implemented, the actual practicalities of getting people to Rwanda. So a couple of points that came to mind. The first is, if someone does appeal, would it be the ability of making it non-suspensive of their transfer to Rwanda, i.e. they could still be removed, of course, pending final decisions on their claim. And the second part, in actually getting planes off the ground and actually implementing this, is not something you can just put someone on any plane. So has he also raised the prospect of the Ministry of Defence of their aircraft being used for this transfer?
My right honourable friend will understand that I don't want at this point to go into too much detail of all the operational procedures, but I can reassure him we are thinking about the logistics of that. And of course, within Rwanda itself, there is a process, a well-matured process, whereby people can escalate their claims and do so in a way that is completely consistent with international law. The Rwandans are very, very keen to demonstrate their conformity with international law, just as we are.
Debbie Abrahams.
Deputy Speaker, I have to say that 4 days before the International Human Rights Day, it is quite shameful that we're seeking to disapply parts of the Human Rights Act for a certain group of people. I feel it makes me feel incredibly sad that we're in this situation. But can I ask the Home Secretary, does the Attorney General agree that the Rwanda Treaty does comply with international law? And can we see her written advice?
The Honourable Lady will know that the government's legal advice, she's not in her place anymore, the Attorney General's advice is for government. The government has made it clear that this is in conformity with international law.
Mr Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, will this legislation now mean that it's the British government, elected by the British people, who determine who comes to this country and in what circumstance, free from international, domestic judicial challenge and individual judicial review?
The point is, it is the job of this government to make decisions about immigration policy. I reinforce the point that we are a generous country. We have proven that over and over again. We are an open-minded and generous people. This House reflects the attitude of the British people, which is that one of generosity, but also we expect people to play by the rules. And this is embodied in this piece of legislation, and I can confirm that our view is that it is the voice of this House that should determine our immigration policy, not anyone else.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Office Safeguarding Minister has confirmed on air that the Immigration Minister has resigned. Right. Can the Home Secretary confirm that, and did he know about it?
Mr Deputy Speaker, that has been confirmed. Of course, I speak with the ministers in the department regularly, but ultimately the questions at this session should be about the bill rather than about individuals in the House.
Francois.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. If the Immigration Minister, who is a good man, has resigned over this bill, that is deeply worrying. I want to hear the verdict of the Star Chamber chaired by the Right Honourable Member for Stone. But while we await that, the Home Secretary pointedly ducked several questions about individual appeals. So can I ask him very specifically, as every person we would seek to send to Rwanda is an individual, if under this legislation those people can continue to appeal and appeal in order to delay being put on a flight, what's the point of the bill?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I mean, the point is that there are appeals processes in all legal and judicial processes, and by extension of the argument that he's making, the point that there's an appeal process in UK criminal law, for example, would mean that no one would ever go to prison. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Justice, has just been discussing about what we do in terms of prison placement. So the point is that an appeal process is an important part of any legal process. It will not preclude people from being sent to Rwanda on this scheme. And I would make the point that this scheme is robust. It strengthens our position. It ensures that the decisions that we make in this House, that I and others make in this House, define the UK's immigration policy, not decisions made elsewhere by people unelected.
I can just remind the Home Secretary to face forward, because then his voice is picked up more easily and people can see him. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary and Government will be aware that there has been some surprise of the reciprocal agreement to welcome Rwandan refugees to the United Kingdom. It is a reciprocal agreement. How can the Home Secretary demonstrate the safety of Rwanda as a third country while simultaneously accepting the conditions that produce refugees?
He asks a very, very important question, and this part of the treaty reflects the elements of the previous MOU that's been in place for some time, and it's particularly tied to the non-refoulement. it is envisaged to be used only in very exceptional circumstances, where, as I said in my statement, if there are circumstances, a refugee that we have sent to Rwanda for whatever reason cannot remain in Rwanda, and these will be in exceptionally rare cases, the only place that person can be returned to would be to the UK.
Richard Drax.
Does my right honourable friend agree that all these human rights laws were simply not designed for the massive problem we have of illegal and mainly economic migration that we face today, and that a review is urgently needed?
These frameworks, of which we were one of the founding nations, were designed to deal with some of the issues that we saw in the middle of the 20th century. Often large numbers of people moving relatively short distances for a limited period of time to flee either persecution, abuse or conflict. We are now living under fundamentally different circumstances, where there is an industrial scale attempt to use those laws, those frameworks that were put in place, well-intentioned and important, to facilitate an evil trade, the like of which we probably haven't seen since those dark days of the international slave trade. It is incumbent upon us to put in place frameworks which protect those people who are being manipulated, who are being smuggled, who are being abused by people smugglers. This is what we are seeking to do. We are seeking to do that with our friends in Europe, with our friends in Africa, and in other parts of the world.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If Rwanda were a safe jurisdiction, which he is trying to legislate to say that it is, could he explain why he believes there needs to be legislation in his bill to override the powers of the courts?
The Supreme Court judgment on which to which we are responding highlighted two particular areas. The treaty addresses both those areas. It is the actions that Rwanda has taken with regard to strengthening its institutions, the commitment it has made to non-refoulement, which enables us to say, within the bill, reflecting on the treatment, that Rwanda is a safe country for these purposes. And as I said in response to an earlier question, the UNHCR relies upon Rwanda for its refugee processing, and therefore it is clear through their actions, if not the words, if it's through their actions, that they also regard Rwanda is a good partner for these purposes.
Sir Bill Wigan.
Like the Home Secretary, my constituents want to welcome genuine asylum seekers, like the Ukrainians and the Afghans who now live in my constituency. On this side of the House, he will have detected disquiet about potential elements of this bill. Can he reassure the House that during the process of the bill, we will be able to offer amendments that may improve it, if it is indeed necessary?
This bill will go through the House, although we are seeking to do so at pace. It will go through the processes. I have no doubt that honourable and right honourable members will want to put forward amendments, and of course the government will listen to all ideas that seek to improve the efficiency of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Would the Home Secretary agree that our constituents would expect that before we vote on any measure in this House, we thoroughly understand what it's going to cost? Because in the end, it's not our money we're spending, it's their money. So coming back to the question which you didn't answer before, will you give a figure for how much it will cost this government, our constituents, for each asylum seeker sent to Rwanda for the whole period there, for the whole 5 years? If he won't give a figure now, will he agree to give a figure before we're asked to finally vote on this bill?
The government has committed to release the figures on an annual basis. We are committed to that. And the point that I would make to the House is that dealing with migration, securing our borders, tackling international criminal gangs, none of these things are for free. We do these things because they are the right things to do. Just as the West Africa Squadron of the Royal Navy and the money that this country spent to break the international slave trade was not small amounts of money, it was the right thing to do. It broke an evil trade, and we are committed to break this evil trade.
Sir Christopher Chow.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can my right honourable friend pay tribute to the Immigration Minister who's apparently just resigned and thank him for all the hard work he's put into trying to resolve these issues over several years and obviously working on this bill? And does he feel that the government's going to be inhibited in implementing this bill by the absence of the Immigration Minister? And in particular, can he answer the concerns which have been raised on several occasions during this exchange, that the bill may be fine in dealing with the issue of Rwanda as a safe country in general, but it doesn't deal with the issue of individuals who may be wanting to make claims based upon their own individual circumstances as to why they shouldn't go to Rwanda?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I have from this dispatch box and a number of other locations said how much I value the work of the Immigration Minister. He has done a huge amount of work on this and a number of other areas, and I have said that in a number of areas which have driven down small boat arrivals by a third, the work that he has done has been instrumental, absolutely instrumental, and I have no doubt that the whole of government will work to make sure this legislation achieves what I think all should want to achieve, which is to break the business model of people smugglers and to prevent people being abused by them in an attempt to come and live in the UK.
Joanna Cherry.
From the point of view of those of us who believe in the rule of law, the separation of powers and the universality of human rights, there's at least 3 extraordinary things about what the Home Secretary has said this evening. First, he says he doesn't have confidence in the domestic courts of the United Kingdom because they cannot always be relied upon to do what he wants them to do. Secondly, he says he's going to replace the jurisdiction of the domestic courts of the United Kingdom with ministerial fiat in relation to interim measures passed by a court presiding over a treaty to which we are fully signatories. And thirdly, to quote Jonathan Sumption, it is extraordinary for the law to say that the facts are other than they are, and then to oust the jurisdiction of the courts from determining whether that is the case. It's not just extraordinary, it's also not Article 6 compliant. And of course, the ECHR is part of our domestic law by virtue of the Human Rights Act, which he's not repealing. So my question for him is this: is he proud of driving a coach and horses through the British Constitution?
What I am absolutely proud of is the fact that we are seeking to break the business model of people smugglers. And we recognise that as the threat from organised criminality, for people who prey on the weak and the vulnerable, put their lives at risk, as their tactics evolve, so our response has to evolve. This is an international problem. We are resolving it through international relationships. I'm proud of the work that Rwanda has done to reform their institutions with our support and the support of others. And we, on this side of the House, will not rest until those people smuggling gangs have been broken.
Robert Goodwill.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've been listening carefully to the questions coming from the other side of the House, and there's been a lot of references to human rights, but surely the ultimate human right is the right to life. And so does the Home Secretary agree with me that when this legislation is passed and comes into effect, there will be fewer people going to a watery grave in the English Channel?
Exactly.
The honourable gentleman makes an incredible, a fundamental point. Every time I see, and I'm sure the other members and right honourable members in the House, every time we see stories of people who have drowned in the Channel, drowned in the Mediterranean, because their desire for a better life is being manipulated by criminals, it is heartbreaking, and we are duty-bound to do something about it. And hand-wringing and stone-throwing from the opposition benches will not save those people's lives. So we choose to take action. We choose to break the criminal gangs. We are working with international partners in Africa, on the continent and elsewhere, to break the business model of these gangs. They can either help or they can stand aside whilst we try and do the right thing and prevent people dying in the seas.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr. Deputy Speaker,
The Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party has said the government should just ignore the law and send people back anyway. Does the Home Secretary agree with the Deputy Chair of his own party? And if he does, can he tell us, when did the Conservative Party become the party that ripped up laws and supported disorder?
We absolutely abide by international law.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Immigration, by any admission, is a complex, long-standing and developing challenge, and I've listened carefully to the concerns, the obstacles and the different perspectives that have been raised this evening through questions. I've also noticed the confidence with which my right honourable friend has answered many of those questions. So can I ask him to look ahead, and can I ask him, has he any expectation of when he might be able to return to this House and declare the bill a success?
Well, the timing, the passage of any bill is in the hands of the two chambers of this House. We are not in control of the total timescale, but of course we are determined to move quickly on this. Every day that we delay in addressing the criminality of organised criminal people smuggling gangs, more people's lives are put at risk. We intend to work quickly on this. We seek the support of their lordships to move quickly on this so we can get a grip of this terrible situation, so that this set of proposals, in conjunction with the others that we are already implementing, can, as I say, break the model of the people smuggling gangs, save lives at sea, and encourage people that want to come and live and work in this country to do so by the numerous safe and legal routes that we have in place.
Stephen Ferry.
Thank you. I'm opposed to the entirety of this bill and policy. However, as a Northern Ireland MP, I have a particular duty to highlight how important the Human Rights Act is to the Good Friday Agreement, especially policing and justice reform, to Article 2 of the Windsor Framework, and to the Policing and Justice chapter of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So can I ask the Home Secretary, what steps has his department taken to screen this policy and bill against all three of those?
We are absolutely committed to maintaining peace in Northern Ireland. It is something that many people spent their whole political lives pursuing and protecting. I can assure him that we will always seek to protect those the peace that so many people have worked so hard to bring.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Rwandan Foreign Affairs Minister Barroso has tonight said, without lawful behaviour by the UK, Rwanda would not be able to continue with the Migration, Economic and Development Partnership. Without lawful behaviour, Home Secretary. It's being reported in the press that they are getting cold feet because this deal is too toxic for them. Is that the case?
No.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary wants us to take great comfort from the fact that the treaty with Rwanda will be binding in international law. And then in the next page of his statement, assures us that he's going to bring in legislation next week that in certain circumstances will make it a legal requirement for British courts to act contrary to that same international law. Yep. Why should he expect Rwanda to comply with its treaty obligations when his government is going to pick and choose what treaties it complies with and what treaties it tears up?
We will absolutely remain in compliance with international law.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has used some choice language in this place and in recent times associated a particular favourite word of his to his own government's Rwanda policy. What specific changes have been made to have him become such a robust defender of it now?
I'm not quite sure what the point of that question was, Mr Deputy Speaker. I can clarify, if the honourable gentleman really wishes me to do so, I can clarify the points that I made that he makes reference to. I suspect he doesn't really want me to.
Richard Ford. Deputy Speaker. In her personal statement this afternoon, the former Home Secretary said she'd been unable to obtain the support of other government departments for her preferred method of dealing with applicants for asylum. She said, "We must build Nightingale-style detention facilities, and the only way to do this is with the support of the Ministry of Defence." Russia is on manoeuvres. More than 20,000 British troops are being deployed across Northern Europe next year, and this Conservative government is seeking to shrink the army to 73,000. Does the Home Secretary, who was the Foreign Secretary last month, think that our armed forces should be training for war or kettling asylum seekers into camps?
Again, I'm not at all sure how that question has anything to do with the proposals that we have put forward, but he will know that this party of government will always support strong defence of this nation, unlike the parties opposite.
Neil Coyle.
It is clear to the country that this government is riven with division and chaos on this issue. Some still think these plans are batshit, and some think that they don't go far enough, like the immigration minister who has resigned. In an earlier answer today...
Did the honourable member just swear? No, but please, use other words.
Okay. In an earlier answer, the Secretary of State said that the Immigration Minister would be attending Home Affairs Select Committee next Wednesday. Given he's been embarrassed by his own team today, who will now be attending Home Affairs to take questions on this issue? Will it be him?
It will be the Immigration Minister.
Order. Thank you very much for your statement today, Home Secretary, and answering questions for well over an hour. Point of order.
Mr Deputy Speaker, accuracy is incredibly important in this House, and I wouldn't want it to be on record that something is not correct. The Home Secretary's statement said that other countries have since copied our plan with Rwanda. I can find no evidence that that is accurate. Can Mr Deputy Speaker advise on this point of accuracy, because there is no country that is copying the plan with Rwanda?
Point of order, Home Secretary.
Mr Deputy Speaker, a number of countries are exploring third country asylum processing. The example that springs most rapidly to mind is Italy's relationship with Albania.
Thank you very much. Well, this will be the last point of order.
On a point of accuracy, those that are being moved to Albania will be under Italian law. That is not the plan for the Rwanda's plan.
We'll now move on.
So apparently we need to be bound by Italian.
Get your CV out, Home Secretary.
Right, we'll take motion number 3 on plant health. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order papers, Madam Speaker, say aye.
Aye.
No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 4 on retained EU law reform. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order papers, Madam Speaker, say aye.
Aye.
No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 5 on financial services and markets. Minister to move.
Beg to move.
Question is, as on the order papers, Madam Speaker, say aye.
Aye.
No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6 on financial services and markets. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order papers, Madam Speaker, say aye.
Aye.
No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 7 on financial services and markets. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order papers, Madam Speaker, say aye.
Aye.
No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And today I'm calling on the government to introduce a windfall tax on the banks who have exploited this crisis to make super profits, just as the energy companies did before them. Such a tax could create much needed funds to invest in our public services and to help bail out those hit hard by this ongoing economic crisis. But before I make the case for that, I want to look at where we are after 13 years of Tory misrule. British economic growth was recently downgraded again. Britain has now seen well over a decade of economic stagnation. We're living through the largest fall in living standards since records began 75 years ago. This will be the first parliament in history where people are poorer at the end of it than at the beginning. What a record. Wages are set to be no higher in 2028 than they were 20 years before. That's the slowest wage growth in 200 years. This has cost the average worker £10,700 a year in lost pay growth. And shockingly, 9 million younger workers have never worked in an economy where they have seen sustained average wage rises. Income inequality in the UK is higher than any other large European country. So we have a much weaker economy, much lower living standards. That's the record of this government's agenda of austerity, deep public service cuts and of trickle-down economics. And it's created a social nightmare too. 14 million people live in poverty, including over 4 million children. 1 in 7 people are facing hunger. 6 million households are in fuel poverty. As a cost of living crisis continues to hit families across the UK, this should be a time to bail them out. It should be a time of public investment to boost economic growth and living standards and to rescue our public services. But instead, the government is plotting another £20 billion in public spending cuts. I can't think of a single policy that would cause more harm than that, more economic harm and more social harm. But when we talk of a worsening economic and social crisis, we can't forget the class politics of it all. And that's how it affects the 99% and how it affects the 1%. We hear a lot about the cost of living crisis, but it's not a crisis for the elites. For them, it's been boom time. There's never been so many UK billionaires, and British billionaires have increased their wealth by £120 million every single day over the past decade. Profits of the UK's largest companies are now 89% higher than before the pandemic. Bankers' bonuses have hit record highs. Bosses' pay at the largest 100 companies has been going up and up by 16% the past year. And one sector that has been doing very well out of the crisis is the banks. Just like the oil and gas companies, the banks have used this crisis to line their pockets. While millions of people struggle to pay their mortgage and rent, the banks have been cashing in. Higher interest rates have enabled them to charge households more for mortgages and firms more for loans. But these higher interest rates have not been passed on to savers. I will give way.
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Leeds East for bringing this forward? I spoke to him beforehand, and can I say this? Does the Honourable Member not agree that the closure of high street banks, some 11 in my constituency of Strangford, especially in rural communities, has left a massive problem of rural isolation, and that a windfall tax for the banks making profits should be made, and that money should be routed to the rural communities who have felt the brunt of the banks' thirst for enhanced profits over service that seems to be the bank's calling card?
Well, the Honourable Member makes a very important point, and the example he gives of the closure of so many high street banks, disadvantaging people in my community and in rural communities as well, just goes to show that the bank's huge increase in profits hasn't been achieved by delivering a better service to consumers at all. And the higher interest rates haven't been passed on to savers. They've been hoarded by the banks, creating a windfall of many billions for the banks for doing nothing productive. Such a transfer from the public to banks would be unjustifiable at any time, but it's especially so when so many people are struggling to cover the essentials, and when our public services are on their knees due to Tory cuts. So the banks should face the same type of tax on their unearned and undeserved windfalls that the energy companies have. The pre-tax profits of the big four banks, Lloyds, Barclays, HSBC and NatWest, show why this would be a just tax. In the first 9 months of 2023, they made a staggering £41 billion in pre-tax profits. Now that's almost double the £23 billion they made in the same period last year, according to research by Unite the Union. So the question that we have to answer is this: are we going to allow this government to claim that more austerity and cuts are inevitable and that public investment is unaffordable? Or are we going to build a better tax system that focuses on making the wealthiest pay their fair share? I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. And on that point about a better tax system, My understanding is that business likes certainty. Banks, like businesses, need to be able to predict the fiscal regime in the future. But this Conservative government cut the bank surcharge from 8% to 3% earlier this year. So rather than a one-off windfall tax, wouldn't it be better to reinstate the bank surcharge at 2016 levels, reinstate the bank levy at the rate it was earlier this year, and so have £18 billion additional for HMRC between now and 2027?
My honourable friend makes a really valuable intervention there, and I'll come on to the fact it's totally unjustifiable the way the government has reduced the surcharge in that way. And I think both approaches are possible and desirable. Yes, a windfall tax, but also reverse that cut as well. Because if we're going to build a fairer, better tax system that focuses on making the wealthiest pay their fair share, then we can invest in rebuilding the economy so it serves the majority of people. We can invest in renewing our public services, and we can give people back some hope. A windfall tax on unexpected and undeserved bank profits can play an important role in creating that fairer tax system, because banks aren't reinvesting these profits into the economy. They're handing out huge pay and bonuses, which could go even higher, aided and abetted by the government's decision to scrap the bonus cap. And this all comes at a time when the banks are turning their backs on local communities. As the honourable member for Strangford mentioned earlier, bank branches have been disappearing from our high streets at an alarming rate. Since 2015, almost 6,000 branches have permanently closed their doors. In a time of deepening social crisis, while they collect record profits, banks have made it even more difficult for working people to receive access to their finances and get financial advice. I'll happily give way.
Does the honourable member not feel that there's something immoral about banks making high profit margins, closing branches, and their profit margins actually grow, and people then are disadvantaged? There's something immoral, isn't it? People who are being disadvantaged and people who are making more.
Hear, hear. I think the honourable gentleman is completely correct. There is something immoral about the way that the bank's profits are soaring whilst they're not delivering a better service for their customers, particularly vulnerable customers, particularly if you look at who is particularly disadvantaged, the less affluent, the disabled, the elderly. That's not how we should be going about things, and he makes an important moral case on that. In terms of the case for a windfall tax, based on the latest quarterly results, a windfall tax in the UK could raise between 4 billion and 16 billion this year from the profits of the big four banks alone, depending on the form that windfall tax takes. That's billions of pounds that could be used to boost public investment and to tackle the soaring inequality that we're facing. Now, Spain's progressive government offers an example. They introduced a 4.8% windfall levy on certain bank incomes and commissions above a threshold of €800 million. Now, replicating that here could raise almost £4 billion this year. And even Margaret Thatcher introduced a form of windfall tax with a 2.5% tax on banks' non-interest bearing deposits. And in words that sound all too familiar today, Thatcher said that the banks had, and I quote, made their large profits as a result of our policy of high interest rates rather than because of increased efficiency or better service to the customer. Such a tax in the UK, according to positive money calculations, could raise up to £11 billion today. And a windfall tax, in whatever form, would be popular. According to a poll commissioned for the TUC, 3/4 of the public support a windfall tax on banks' excess profits. And that includes, by the way, 76% of Conservative 2019 voters. But perhaps the simplest move, and we've heard this from earlier in an intervention, would be to reverse the tax break for banks that the government introduced in last year's autumn statement. They slashed the bank profit surcharge from 8% to 3%, saying this was to cushion cushion them against the impact of higher corporation tax rates. But this surcharge, along with the banking levy, was one of the special taxes raised on banks after the financial crash due to the greater risks that banks posed to our wider economic stability. The risk they pose clearly still remains, and so too should the surcharge. TUC General Secretary Paul Novak rightly described the slashing of the surcharge as starving our public services of much needed funds at the worst possible time. Reversing it could provide key funds to, for example, introduce universal school meals, scrap the 2-child cap, or fund a proper pay rise for junior doctors. The TUC estimates that the Treasury will lose at least £1.5 billion a year over the next 4 years, though they add that it is likely to be more given the recent boost to bank profits. And Positive Money estimates that reversing cuts to both the bank surcharge and the levy could raise over £4 billion this year. We need to be clear, it was a political choice for the Prime Minister to slash the surcharge on the banks, just as it was a political choice to scrap the cap on bankers' bonuses. Doing so is a sign of what's so wrong in our current taxation system. It's clear that more of the same Tory dogma over the past 13 years of cuts and trickle-down economics is not the answer. All that would succeed in doing is to deepen the social crisis that is harming so many families in Britain. It's time we put a stop to that. It's time to tackle the tax perks handed to the wealthy. The banks were bailed out when they were in trouble during the 2007 global financial crisis. It's now time for them to be taxed fairly to help bail out communities who are suffering because of the Tory party's focus on building an economy that serves the wealthy few while the vast majority fall ever further behind. A windfall tax on bank profits is a just policy, it's economically sound, and it'll be welcomed by people across this country, and I look forward to the Minister's response.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I let me first congratulate the member for Leeds East for securing this debate. He's an assiduous attender in this House. He cares a lot about these issues, and I respect him deeply. But in particular, I love his conversion, like his very good friend, the Leader of the Opposition, to quoting and loving Margaret Thatcher. And I can't wait to hear reports of when he visits his local Labour Party at the end of this week and how that goes down. And for my part, I'm pleased that this debate provides me with an opportunity to set out the measures that this government has already taken to ensure banks make a fair and sustainable tax contribution. But before I get on to that, I just can't resist just to deal with some of the particular points that he made about the economic context that we find ourselves in this country. He mentioned economic growth. It's important that he recognises that the OBR and independent forecasters, when assessing the autumn statement that has recently been delivered to this House by the Chancellor, said that the measures contained within it, the pro-growth measures, represented the largest boost to economic growth over the forecast period of any fiscal event in a generation. And when he mentioned, I think he said, whether austerity and cuts or public sector cuts were somehow inevitable, and that somehow this Treasury, this Chancellor, this government felt that that was a good thing, we completely reject that characterisation. And all I would say is that borrowing an extra £28 billion as a proposal from his front bench, I don't know if it's his idea or his proposal, but the proposal from his front bench and the Shadow Chancellor, borrowing that extra money will end up to raising inflation and raising interest rates, and that is what makes austerity and cuts more likely. But I should carry on to deal with the real substance of his remarks on the banks and the subject of a windfall tax. It's first important to highlight that financial and related professional services is a vital part of the UK economy. It employs nearly 2.5 million people, 2/3 of whom are employed outside London, indeed in his own constituency. I'm sure he has many members of the thriving financial and professional services sector in Leeds. And as I laid out to the City UK's national conference earlier this month, I am committed to delivering the Chancellor's vision for a financial services sector that is open, sustainable, innovative, competitive, whilst also acting, and this is very important, in the interest of communities and people and citizens all across our 4 nations. And I would just urge him to consider my view and the government's view that these ambitions do not contradict each other. Rather, it is the UK's globally competitive financial services sector that supports jobs across this country and underpins access to finance for individuals, indeed if they want to buy a home, households and businesses who need to borrow in order to expand and invest, and consumers across the country. Now, in relation to the potential merits of a bank windfall tax, before we consider this, I just want to reflect on some of the bigger picture about the health of the UK banking sector as a whole. We should be encouraged to see a strong, well-capitalised and competitive banking sector in the UK, owing in no small part to the significant regulatory and market reforms that have been implemented since the global financial crisis. Banks are the most important source of credit, providing individuals and businesses with the financial resources to succeed. For example, in 2022, banks lent a total of £65.1 billion to small and medium-sized businesses. This is the majority of businesses in our country, and helped 370,000 first-time buyers onto the property ladder. And this illustrates that these institutions are not, in the pockets of fat cats. They serve the nation. They serve ordinary working people and early-stage entrepreneurs and business people. Now, in addition, the retail savings market currently offers a range of competitive options to savers, who can now access the highest rates in recent years on a variety of instant access and fixed-term products. And one other point that was brought up again by the Honourable Member for Strangford and the Honourable Member who secured this debate for Leeds East. On bank branches, I share his view that we need to maintain access to cash for rural communities. And indeed, what he will see from me and this government is that we should make sure we speed up and spread banking hubs throughout as many of our communities as possible. Of course.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. I opened one of these banking hubs a fortnight ago in Axminster, and I would agree with him that it's really fantastic to see these facilities, and I know that my constituents are very grateful. Could he perhaps comment on when we'll see the opening of the next tranche, such as a banking hub for Sidmouth?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. What I would say is that this is a rolling programme. We're trying to speed it up. And, indeed, in due course, there will, of course, be changes and updates to that programme. Of course, if I continue, it is equally important that banks make an equitable and sustainable tax contribution. And the government's taken significant steps since 2010 to ensure this. First, we introduced the bank levy, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, in the wake of the financial crisis. Now, this was designed to encourage banks to move away from risky funding models and ensure they make a fair contribution. The levy has raised vital revenue to help fund the public services we all rely upon, over £28 billion so far, and it continues long after the financial crisis to bring in over £1 billion a year. Secondly, in 2016, we introduced the Bank Corporation Tax Surcharge. Banks currently pay an additional 3% rate of tax on their profits, which, when combined with standard corporation tax, means that banks pay more tax on their profits. You wouldn't know if you heard the Honourable Gentleman's speech. Banks now pay more tax on their profits than most other businesses, and a higher overall rate than when the surcharge was at 8%. This surcharge has raised over £13 billion and continues to bring in over £1.3 billion a year. We've also taken action to prevent banks from claiming tax relief on losses incurred during the financial crisis, as well as for compensation payments for PPI and other sources or in other cases of misconduct. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this money is the public's money. These measures help support the needs and ambitions of our country's citizens when it's appropriate for the state to do so. I know that is why the Honourable Member is so keen to see this windfall tax introduced. And although I share his concern for supporting the interests of his fellow citizens, the measures I've outlined today demonstrate how this government is already ensuring that banks make a fair and sustainable tax contribution. Having outlined how our current approach has generated significant tax revenue for the UK, I just want to conclude by turning to how deviating from the approach that I've set out, for example, by adopting a windfall tax, as he has suggested, carries significant risk for the health and competitiveness of our banking sector, which in and of itself would contain significant risk for the health and competitiveness of our economy. A jurisdiction's overall tax burden clearly informs decision made by internationally active banks about where to operate. It is also clear that other international financial centres, which are our competitors, recognise this as well. A higher level of bank taxation in the UK would, and I want to be very clear about this, significantly worsen our competitive position in relation to key global financial hubs in the US, in Asia, in Europe. This would have a threefold negative impact. First, it would put existing jobs at risk. Second, it would damage the chances of future jobs being created through new activity being set up. And finally, contrary to raising significant yield for the Exchequer, I fear it would have the opposite approach. It would jeopardise the considerable tax revenue, which I've already set out, already being generated by the banking sector. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the banking sector's contribution to the UK's economy should not be underestimated. The amount of tax paid by banks is rightly proportionate to that contribution. Now, let me be clear, the government still maintains that the sector should continue to make a fair and sustainable tax contribution. We've taken steps since 2010 to ensure this, and it is no contradiction to say that we need a strong and competitive banking sector that supports individuals, households and businesses, because that is foundational importance to our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question is, this House do now adjourn. May I say aye? Aye. No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order,